Hello and welcome to those of you who are ready and signing in for the School Climate Transformation Grant second webinar. I'm Rob Horner. I'm co-director of the OSEP Technical Assistance Grant, and I'm here with Steve Goodman, who is coordinating the technical assistance support out of Michigan, and Jessica Swain Bradway, who shares her time between Illinois and Oregon, but is most directly linked with the Midwest PBIS effort out of Illinois. We are delighted that you're willing to spend this morning with us. The focus of this webinar is on evaluation plans and evaluation reports. This topic was developed directly based on the worksheets and discussion questions and comments that came from grantees when you submitted information. And we're especially appreciative to all of you who made comments. Now, before we get too far down the road, I also want to extend real appreciation to Ivan Polk, who is coordinating the technical side of what's going on. If during the webinar you end up having problems, you can see at the bottom of the screen, we would encourage you to email Ivan, and he will at least be able to let you know the most logical options that we've got for keeping you engaged and for moving forward. So we want to make sure that everyone gets as much access as possible. We're looking forward to having this be a process that we essentially try and do monthly. So we are anticipating a March, an April, and a May webinar. The March webinar will be on March 19. It will be at the same time, 8 o'clock Pacific, 11 o'clock Eastern. It will focus on the role and function of leadership teams, and it will be delivered by George Sugai and by Heather George from Florida. I also want to, before we get started, let everyone know that this webinar is being recorded. It will be available both in recording and in slides on the pbis.org website by Monday. So with that as an introduction, let me move into the actual content that we've got. Our goal today is to focus on evaluation expectations, both what the questions are, what the data sources look like, and what the reporting formats look like, both for LEAs, for districts, and for SEAs, states that are implementing school climate transformation grants. The questions that we're getting are really revolving around, now that you've got the grant and you're looking at the specifics of what are going to be required in the evaluation reports. Some real questions are coming up. Well, what are the best measures for collecting those data? How do we summarize those data, and how do we actually report those data? We also want to leave significant time for comments and questions, and we would encourage, as we go through the initial elements of the webinar, that any of you who have questions, please use the question box to the right of your screen and write those in. Jessica has agreed to be our question moderator. She will be collecting and summarizing questions, and the last 15 minutes or so of the webinar will focus on your questions and other comments and conditions going forward. We'd like you to enter your questions at any time during the webinar, but we're going to come back to them and summarize them at the end. The organization, I'm going to start by focusing on the LEAs, the districts. What are the evaluation questions? What are the indicators? We're going to ask you to give a poll where you actually indicate of 5 major issues that we're going to raise. We're going to select 3 of them for the sake of time and ask your sense of confidence. Part of what we're looking for is for you to give us a little bit of feedback. So those of you who are sitting far away from your computers, at least one person in each room at each computer, we'd like you to be close enough that you could click and give us a little bit of feedback as we go through. Steve Goodman has agreed to then walk us through the state evaluation planning core measures, the most important selected measures, and then we will again do a poll, and after that we'll go through some of the additional evaluation measures that you have proposed and have time for comments, questions, and we would welcome your suggestions for future webinars, either issues related to content or issues related to format. Now, one of the things that we want to be careful of is a disclaimer that indicates that what we are presenting really comes from our work in the Technical Assistance Center. This is meant to be informatory, not obligatory. We are looking to offer guidance based on our experience, but we've got to be careful. Unlike the initial webinar, we are not speaking for the federal government, either for OSEP or for the Safe and Healthy Students Office. The presenters, we thought it would be good for you to actually see who we are. There's a nice picture of Steve Goodman in Michigan, Jessica Swain Bradley, who shares her time between Oregon and Illinois, and I'm Rob Porter at the University of Illinois. The webinar has been designed for essentially three audiences. One are those of you who are principal investigators who were involved initially in writing the grants and will be delivering the reports that come to the federal government. Second are the group of you who are project coordinators, and what we're finding is many project coordinators for the school climate transformation grants are just now joining the process. Some of you were involved early in actually writing and securing the grants. Others are coming in right now and are sort of catching up with, what is really the direction of this? And with at least half of the projects, probably closer to 2/3, the people who are going to be the evaluators are now being selected. So this is meant in part for those of you who are principal investigators and coordinators, some suggestions for how you might shape the job descriptions of project evaluators. And we recognize that some project evaluators are operating inside their grants. They are members of the state or district faculty. Others are highly professional external evaluators that have been doing evaluations for a long time and are very skilled and knowledgeable about the process. So we're looking and responding to an array of different expectations. When you look at evaluation, one of the things that makes things a little bit complicated is there are at least three different kinds of indicators that we would encourage you to look at. The first are those that are actually required by the RFP. Those are the GPRA requirements. And those are the ones that every grantee, both LEA and SEA, there's one set for LEA, one set for SEA, will be expected to respond to. There's an additional set of evaluation questions, targets, and measures that were not required by the RFP, but that different grantees wrote into their proposals. If you added more to your proposal, the expectation is going to be that you actually report on those things that you built into your initial proposal. So those of you who went beyond the basic requirements, those will be expected. What we found is, as you have been looking at, my goodness, we now actually have to do this grant, many of the people who are grantees are wanting to ask evaluation questions that go beyond those required and that were not included in their initial RFP submission. So things like looking more carefully at a school climate measure, looking at measures of juvenile justice impact of arrest records and times when students were referred to juvenile justice. Questions related to the district capacity and improving the capacity of the district to implement evidence-based practices. Questions related to actually improving the capacity of the state to adopt, identify, and evaluate implementation of evidence-based practices. So several of you have started looking at additional questions, and we recognize and support that. For the sake of time this morning, we're going to really focus primarily on those questions that are required. Those are the ones that are the biggest ones. So let me launch first into the state evaluation questions. There are 4 that were stipulated in the grant proposals, and one of them has 2 parts, so you could argue that there are 5. The first is looking at whether your implementation of multi-tiered behavior support framework is related to a change in the number and percentage of schools that report a decrease in office discipline referrals. So one of the things we're going to come back to is the clarity, specificity, reliability, and validity with which you can measure office discipline referrals. A second question focuses on improvement in attendance. And this will be especially important for those of you who are focused on middle school and high school, where attendance has become increasingly an issue. One of the things that really integrates the emphasis on juvenile justice and education is the third question, which focuses on the percentage of schools. And notice again and again, school is used as a unit of analysis, where you're looking at the rate of suspensions and expulsions. And remember, I said there were one question that broke into 2. This is that one. So the first part of this is on total, what are the suspensions and expulsions? The second is, what about suspensions and expulsions that are only related to possession of drugs or alcohol, to substance abuse? The fourth question, and the one that we're going to actually start with, is actually looking at, it asks, to what extent, as a function of your implementation efforts, have schools actually adopted a multi-tiered behavior support framework? So we're going to start with that one and actually talk, because that is the question that has raised most questions and concerns with people who have been responding. One of the things that has happened, if you look across the 71 LEAs, and remember right now we are focused most directly on the district evaluation questions, the LEA questions. We're going to come back to SEAs in just a minute. But if you look at what LEA grantees proposed, they proposed to implement multi-tiered behavior support frameworks that incorporated most frequently positive behavior interventions and supports, but also an array of different strategies, mental health first aid, restorative justice and restorative practices, safe and civil schools, Project Achieve, ripple effects, check and connect. And you can see this is not even a full list of all the different approaches that have been proposed. The message I want to give is that when you're looking at a fidelity measure, part of what you're going to need to come back to is the kind of strategy or approach that is being proposed. As you look at that, however, one of the things that's going to be important, remember the whole focus on multi-tiered behavior support. So you're going to be asked not just to say, give me a number related to fidelity, but you're going to be asked for a number related to Tier 1 practices, to Tier 2 practices, and to Tier 3 practices. Regardless of the blend of different strategies that you propose, and you could have one strategy that was only in Tier 2, you will, across the entire grant, be asked to comment on Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3. Partly as a function of that, we would suggest this. Those of you who are evaluators or project coordinators looking at selecting an evaluation measure, consider this. You need evaluation measures that will give you scores for each of at least 3 tiers of behavior support, so that you're actually demonstrating implementation of a multi-tiered behavior support framework. Second, that the measures that you use need to meet certain requirements so that they are believable, and ideally they're going to be able to be aggregated across grantees. So we're looking for, do you have good construct validity, test-retest reliability, inter-rater agreement, usability? You should be able to defend the factor structure of whatever you're using, and to the extent that you can associate it with other multi-tiered behavior support framework fidelity measures, that would be a great strength. You may use any measure that fits the intervention or the approach that you're using, but it will be important to have whatever fidelity measure you use actually meet all three tiers or deliver metrics for all three tiers and meet minimal technical adequacy standards. An example of one option is the tiered fidelity inventory. And many of you were in Chicago when we were presenting this measure. It is documented to have good technical adequacy scores. It is available at no cost off of either the pbis.org website, or you can actually download and enter data into PBIS apps. If you were to use this, one of the advantages we would have is across the different grants, we would be able to keep track of the extent to which whatever strategy was being used was actually building a foundation for multi-tiered behavior support systems. The TFI operates with a framework where you get each feature, the data source, and each item is scored as a 0, not started, a 1, partially implemented, or a 2. Here's an example of one item which focuses on team composition. Virtually all of the multi-tiered behavior support framework options that exist assume that a school team will be guiding implementation. So this is simply an example of how you would assess if that were there. We do within the TFI offer a total score, so this would be an example of a total score for the first, for a school, the first administration, second administration. The more important and more valuable demonstration is Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3. Dark green is before, light green after. The TFI allows a breakout by subscales, but this is primarily used for professional development and coaches as they look at scores across multiple schools. You look primarily at individual schools by comparing item by item, using this item score to do an action plan. Now, one of the things we would recommend, whatever fidelity measure you use should be used not just once a year, but typically at least 2 to 3 times a year. And each time you use it, it should produce information for an action plan. So say, for example, teaching expectations was listed as a 0 by a school team. We would expect that they would develop an action for that item, who would do it and by when they would do it. So the tiered fidelity inventory is one measure you can use. If you were then, as a evaluator, looking at change across time for a group of schools, this would be one format you could use. Say you had 18 schools that were implementing your multi-tiered behavior support framework. You look at Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3 on the left at 3 different points in time. The whisker bar graph, the top of the bar is the highest score, the bottom of the bar is the lowest score, and the box gives you the mean. Over time, you can look at change in the lowest score, change in the highest score, change in the mean, and one of the things you always look for in real implementation is decrease in the range. So this would be one way in which you could actually display change over time at multiple tiers. Now, that deals with fidelity. The other areas that you're looking at, discipline referrals, attendance, and suspensions, expulsions, almost all of that comes from your existing school information systems. So office discipline referrals, the only thing that we would really recommend is, of the systems that we've seen, too many have labels for office discipline referral problems, problem behaviors, but not operational definitions. So one of the things we would recommend is, for each of the problem categories, actually look at definitions. Break the definitions out by major and by minor, and have it be clear how you would organize not just any office discipline referral, but those that are staff managed versus office managed. A useful resource is an article by Larry Urban that was written in 2004 that focuses on when office discipline referrals are actually useful. Too often we've got office discipline referral data that is collected in a manner that is difficult to interpret. So we would recommend those of you who are evaluators that this article would be a useful one to look at. We also encourage separation of the basic district information system, like Synergy, PowerSchool, Aries, Skyward, from a school-based decision system that allows you to actually drill down and use data for decision-making. In terms of reporting, one of the things that we would suggest is for office referrals, consider reporting majors, because majors are the area that cuts across elementary, middle, and high most efficiently, and report the rate of office discipline referrals per 100 students. So here's a graph of a school reporting major office discipline referrals per 100 students at time 1, time 2, and time 3. Notice that one of the things that you can do is if you use clearly defined categories that meet the urban requirements, we actually have some standards that may be helpful. This table is reported on the pbis.org website every August 15, and it summarizes the mean and median 25th percentile and 75th percentile for schools that are elementary schools, K5, K6, middle schools, 6, 7, 8, or 7, 8, 9, and high schools, 9, 12. There also are some measures for K8 and for K12, although this number of schools is much smaller. Part of what this gives you, if you look at the category in the middle column of means, it gives you the average office discipline referrals per 100 students per day and the standard deviation in parentheses. As you can see, the standard deviations are high, which is why we would encourage using the median as your best indicator of central tendency. You also get the 25th percentile schools with very low rates and the 75th percentile schools with higher rates. So it gives a way of being able to say, what's an absolute number? How does that compare nationally? And then you, of course, can compare across time. Looking at multiple schools, if you had 5 elementary, 5 middle, and 5 high schools, this would be a way in which you could say, what's the office discipline referral per 100 students? And the red line is the median score, and you can then separate both relatively and absolute. You also, of course, are going to want to be able to talk about change over time, and once again, you can use office discipline referral per 100 students with the whisker bar format where the top is the high, the bottom is the low, and the box is the middle, with the blue bar, again, indicating the national median that for schools that are using Swiss. We also recommend that you look carefully at attendance rates. And the one thing that is most important, everybody is already doing an incredible job of attendance. Be very, very clear about the definition of what it means for being at school. Many schools, many states, many districts use if you're there for at least half a day, it counts. Some use if you show up at all. Some use if you telecommute in, you show up. The only thing that we would really do is recommend, one, be very clear at the definition for what counts as attending the school, and also for unexcused events, break out, or for absences, break out unexcused and excused. So essentially, we would expect something that says the percent of students attending per day, so an attendance rate, unexcused absences, excused absences, and total absences. And again, breaking that out by elementary, middle, and high school. Those of you who are doing K8 and K12, we would actually recommend breaking those out separate from the 3 that you've got here. Similar messages for the reporting of suspension and expulsion. You're going to be looking at suspensions per 100 students per year. In most cases, per day is not a very useful metric. And being careful to break out both suspensions for each school in a summary, expulsions for each school in the summary, and then separating those that are done, those suspension and expulsions for substance abuse, for alcohol, tobacco, and whatnot. This might be, for example, a graph of a school's suspension per 100, year 1, year 2, year 3. You see the red bar is total, the green bar is for substance abuse only. One interesting tidbit is there is an evaluation brief that will be posted on pbis.org within the next month that actually demonstrates implementation of multi-tiered behavior support framework is statistically related to a lower level of suspension and expulsion from high schools for illegal drug use. All right, that's a quick review, but I would hope that a lot of that was information you already had. So we've looked at the 4 required questions for LEAs. And at this point, what we'd like to do is to take a quick point in time and say, if you were to consider your confidence that you've got what you need to deal with decreases in office referrals, increases in attendance, decrease in suspension expulsion, decrease in substance abuse, and implementation with Fidelity. That would be at least a start that we're getting to at this point in the webinar. We realize that this was fast and that you may want to go back and look at it in more detail, but our point was to try and identify those areas that have been key concerns. Now, given time constraints, we're only going to ask 3 questions. And the way that this will work is Ivan will put a poll question up for 15 seconds. Please rate it 1, low confidence that you actually know how to measure decreases in office discipline referrals, to 5, high confidence that you've got an understanding. Not that you can do it, but you've got an understanding of how you would do it. So at this point, I'm going to turn the poll structure over to Ivan. Ivan, 15 seconds with question 1, 5-second reporting, 15 seconds with question 3, suspension and expulsion, and reporting, 15 seconds with implementation fidelity. Ivan, can you take it from here, please? All right, at this point, we will shift the control of the webinar to Steve Goodman, and Steve will walk us through the evaluation questions for the state. Ivan, can you make that happen, please?
Well, thank you. This is Steve, and I'll be talking about the performance indicators for the state level. There are 3 performance indicators that are important for within the School Climate Transformation Grant. The first is the number of training and technical assistance events provided by the SCA School Climate Transformation Grant program to assist LEAs in implementing a multi-tiered behavioral framework. So again, this first part is just looking at the number of schools and training events that are provided. The second one is the number and percentage of LEAs provided training or technical assistance by the SCA School Climate Transformation Grant program that report an improvement in knowledge and understanding of the implementation of a multi-tiered behavioral framework. And finally, the number and percentage of schools and LEAs provided training or technical assistance by the SCA School Climate Transformation Grant program that implement a multi-tiered behavioral framework. So if you look at the 3 of these, the first is saying that training and technical assistance is provided. The second is saying that is there an improved knowledge and understanding, and the third is that information of improved knowledge and understanding applied to create a multi-tiered behavioral framework. So we'll talk about this this last item first, so it's the number and percentage of schools who are implementing a multi-tiered behavioral framework. And the reason we talked about this first here is because it ties into what Rob was saying earlier around the fidelity of a multi-tiered behavioral framework implementation in schools receiving support. So Rob talked about the fidelity of using the tiered fidelity inventory. So that bottom section you can see here, what we are suggesting is you can compile that information, aggregate it from, collect it from the schools implementing, then to the district, and then to the state. The other metric here you see is the number of schools implementing a multi-tiered behavioral framework within LEAs receiving the technical assistance support. So possible measures around that are collecting information around the demographics and who's participating and logs of that information. I'll give you some examples. Here's just a log of the number of schools implementing multi-tier behavioral framework. So in this example, we are interested in the number of schools in districts who are participating in the program. So for example, at the state level, we may have several districts, and the number of schools participating in those districts, there are 24 elementary. Middle school, there are 12 schools participating, and the high school level, there would be 8 schools who are within participating districts. Now, what we know is that there may not be all the schools at once participating. They're just the districts who are participating, and some schools may be staggered approach. So for this example, in 2013-2014, of the 24 possible schools, 10 started out participating. And then 2014-2015, 4 additional elementary schools were added on for a total of 14. So by breaking it down to the number of schools possible in the participating district and the actual number of schools who are implementing, we are able to get a percent. So for example, 10 schools, elementary, were participating, implementing this work out of possible 24, which would be in 2013-2014, 42%. So the reason why we're collecting this information is to see what is the reach, how big a scope is the work taking place within the districts we're working with and schools within those districts. A way to display it in a graphic form, the dark bars here, the dark green, represents the number of new schools, and it's a cumulative event, so the lighter green represents existing. So again, with our example of elementary, there were 10 elementary schools who started working on implementing a multi-tier behavioral framework in 2013-2014. And by adding on 4 more, you can see the 4 represents the dark green area for 2014-2015, which brings a total of 14 elementary schools. So it's just a quick way to see if you're adding on, like a cohort model, adding on schools each year, you can see the cumulative effect of cumulative number of additional schools. When Rob talked about implementation fidelity using the tiered fidelity inventory, here's an example of putting that in an average across the project. So as you are working at a state level, you want to see elementary school, what's the average fidelity subscale for Tier 1? What's the average fidelity subscale for Tier 2, which would be the yellow bar, and then of course the red would be Tier 3 fidelity. So by doing it this way, we can compare the average for the middle school, high school, or elementary school, and we can compare across years just to see where are we making a difference. The indicator here of looking at the training and technical assistance events provided by the School Climate Transformation Grant Program to assist LEAs implementing a multi-tier behavioral framework. One way we can look at this is to see the number and length of training and technical assistance events. Possible ways to measure that is just counting the number of trainings and technical assistant log. And another metric is the perceived value and quality of the training. So is there a perception from the recipients that this is meaningful? And again, we can look at training and technical assistance evaluations for that. So here's an example of a training record. If you look here, each row represents a training event. So as a statewide program, I can see here that the first row of 12715, that the training topic was a school-wide positive behavior intervention support, day 1 for elementary. The duration, it was a 1-day event. Carleton Public Schools was the district, and there were 2 schools represented in the training. There's an early elementary and upper elementary with a total of 22 participants for that training event. Now, by recording this on each row, I can tally up and say, well, our running total, we have 3 days so far training, which represents 3 districts. Of those 3 districts, there were 6 elementary schools and 2 secondary schools for 8 schools total. And I can also see the number of participants. If we are simply looking at the number of training events, we're not necessarily collecting information on the perception of how well that training is taking place. So what we have been doing is looking at training evaluation forms. So after each training event, we want to look and see from the participant's point of view, was the learning a valuable use of the time? Are they leaving, the participants leaving with tools and strategies to successfully complete their next steps? So we ask these questions to help understand how valuable, at least perception-wise, was the training that was provided. And the participants could mark in, is it strongly agree, or slightly agree, or disagree. What we do next then is to summarize that information in a chart so we can go across the project and say, yes, strongly agree, we've got almost 60% who see that this training is valuable. So it's just a way to quickly summarize to see for each event where we are at. One other thing we have been doing is, if you want to see, folks can say, yes, this is a value event or not, but we also are very interested to see, has there been an increase in knowledge or understanding of the work? Now, a couple ways that you can do that. You can go in and do a pre-test, post-test, which can take a lot of time, right, for understanding what should be done beforehand and afterwards. Or you can go on and say, ask participants to say, have they a better understanding of where they're at right now? We have, and the problem is, if you say, do you know how well this information is, or do you have a good understanding, the participants may rate it differently because they don't know what it was when they first came in. They weren't exposed to the information. So we provide this retrospective self-assessment example for our work. And here's how it works. At the end of the day, we ask these questions, and we have participants say, I can articulate the purpose of the implementation team, for example, number 1 here, as it relates to implementation of positive behavior intervention supports. We first ask them to rate what their thought was before they even came into training. So again, remember, this is done at the end of the day. We say, think back to when you first came in. Can you articulate that? Now think about after the training and how would you rate yourself? So it's a way to ask the people how much they have learned thinking before and afterwards. The final performance indicator is the number and percentage of LEAs provided training or technical assistance by the SCA School Climate Transformation Grant Program that report an improvement in knowledge, understanding, and implementation of multi-tiered behavioral framework. So we can look at the number of LEAs, leadership teams, that are receiving technical assistance and the perceived value training of the technical assistance events. So the knowledge and understanding as a result of, we can take surveys going across here, as a result of participating in this project, I have increased my knowledge as key features of multi-tiered behavioral framework. So we would just ask a survey of folks to say, yeah, participating in this project, do I have a better knowledge of what's going on? Or as a result in participating in this project, I have a deeper understanding of how to effectively implement. So it's just some examples of a knowledge and understanding survey. And again, we can add this on to a, if that's an annual survey, if you collect that information, we can summarize it and look at year to year. Is there a better perception? Do people say that, yes, I have more increased knowledge or deeper understanding or better implementation of this work?
Part of what we'd like to do now is stop and take a poll and look at the count of LEAs, in that the extent to which you are confident that you can measure the number of LEA schools and training events that you're delivering, the extent to which you are confident in understanding what is required around the knowledge development and skill development portion of the question for number 2. And it comes back to the extent to which you're seeing how measuring multi-tiered behavior support framework fidelity would be something that you would aggregate to be able to talk about a state metric. So at this point, Ivan, if we could turn it to you, and if you could run these 3 poll questions. All right, thank you. At this point, let's try to shift presenter again and shift to Jessica, who will walk us through some of the additional measures that are available, summarize where we stand right now, and bring us back to questions and comments that you have kindly offered as we've gone forward. Ivan, can you shift the control to Jessica, please?
Okay, can folks see that? Are we all good there?
I can see it.
Wonderful. Okay. So thank you, Rob and Ivan, for getting us through some of the technology issues. So we're going to talk briefly about some of these selected measures. And again, as Rob mentioned, there are a range of strategies, approaches folks are embedding into their multi-tiered system. And our district capacity assessment, our state capacity assessment, those selected measures, if you wrote in additional areas, additional goals, you want to be able to report on fidelity and outcomes associated. So 2 that we're going to talk about briefly are the state and district capacity, and school climate was also another measure written into some of those proposals, and we will be addressing that more completely in the future. In the interim, you can send questions our way if you have questions about specific school climate measures. So the state capacity and district capacity assessments are both assessments from OSEP's SISIP Technical Assistance Center. They are no cost. They provide total subscale and item scores, and they can be used at looking through your initial assessment, action planning, and progress monitoring. Both of these, again, are part of building the foundations for multi-tiered systems and are really very broadly encompassing, I think is a way I would describe both of them. The district capacity assessment can be used with a range of approaches that you are implementing, and they are, again, they're both free, and they can be, you can find more information at sisip.org, and you can also email someone in the National Technical Assistance Center for PBIS, and we can help you get set up in that process to use both of those. As a reminder, if it's in a proposal, you are accountable for reporting out on that. So if you wrote in something like Check and Connect or Second Step, for example, as something that will be used within the district, in addition to a fidelity measure for your multi-tiered systems, you want to make sure that you are also evaluating the fidelity of that specific practice or that specific curricula. If you wrote in something like restorative practices, that's going to be maybe a little bit more difficult because we don't yet have a well-developed, rigorously assessed fidelity measure for that. So that's going to be a little bit trickier, and you can, again, reach out to one of the folks in the Technical Assistance Center or work with whatever that community provider or district provider is around restorative practices so we can assess that. It is helpful to have some consistency across evaluation efforts, especially within a district. You want to make sure that you can, have some uniformity there. Here are some resources that may be helpful in consistency, as well as giving all of you some frameworks to operate from. So evaluation blueprint, this PBIS evaluation annual reports, there are a host of those available on pbis.org. The state and district capacity assessments that I just mentioned, a multi-tiered fidelity assessment, the TFI, that is available on pbisapps.org, and there is a host of information about how to complete the TFI on PBS applications, including a webinar It was very thoughtfully put together, and a PowerPoint information so that you can not only learn it yourself, but you have tools to train the folks within your schools and your district and the statewide even. And then there are various multi-tiered data discipline systems available through the Swiss suite of applications, and you can find those at swiss.org or pbsapplications.org. They are very helpful, and there are, as well as there are other applications that folks are using for tracking their student data.
Jessica?
Yes, sir.
We cannot see your slides.
Oh, well, geez. That's not good.
There we go.
Much better. So let me do this then. Just so folks can see the state capacity and district capacity assessment. Here are the websites to grab those. And here are the websites for the evaluation resources that may be helpful. And here is the PBIS Technical Assistance website, some important sections to point out here. Webinars and materials for the School Climate Transformation Grants are located directly under the Current Topics header, so folks can head there once this webinar is posted, as well as accessing other webinars that have been posted. The PBIS blueprints, the evaluation blueprints, are located underneath the PBIS blueprint header. And there are additional resources located underneath evaluation. If you are looking for specific articles, you can actually just type the article name or the authors into the search box. You can also look through the research header, which is immediately to the right of the evaluation up there at the top of those kiddos' heads. And so if you're looking for information to support some of the pieces you're doing, to work with some folks who need a little bit more rationale or support, you can head to that research tab and find what you're looking for there. We've had some really great questions in the question box. Now there are so many of them because I've been talking and haven't been monitoring them. I wanted to share some of those. Rob and Steve, some of those have been pretty quick and straightforward, and I have just responded to them, but I'm going to summarize those for our team. And one of them was about evidence-based practices around restorative practices curricula. And some folks have said we would have written that into our grant, but we couldn't find evidence-based curricula. And Rob and Steve, please feel free to jump in as we go through these questions. It would be helpful. Without an evidence base for a particular strategy or curricula, it makes it harder to assess fidelity as well as impact because those tools have not yet been developed. So it does make it easier and is preferable to have those strategies and curricula that have evidence behind them and that people have used within a multi-tiered framework. We want to make sure that our core features of the multi-tiered framework align with the core features of whatever other curricula and pieces that we are pulling in. We have a general question about will the Department of Ed release an aggregate report summarizing LEA results? And Rob, I'm not sure if that has been part of the discussion.
The federal government has not indicated what kind of reports they are planning to do, but we will anticipate that we would not have any reports that would identify anyone directly without prior approval. And in part, we would anticipate that some level of summary report would be required by Congress after having funded the project. So I would say, in general, yes, we would expect that both Safe and Healthy students and OSEP would expect a summary evaluation of some kind. And it would be important I think, for all of us to have a better idea of what that looks like. I think that they are not clear about exactly how to do that until they get a better understanding of the measures that each LEA and SEA are going to be using.
Great, thank you. We had two different questions about, we had a question about a fidelity measure for practice like Renew, which is a wraparound-based process. I am recommending that folks contact the Renew developers at University of New Hampshire Institute on Disability I also put my email address up there. There is a fidelity measure for renew. There is a fidelity measure for wraparound. There are various fidelity checks for FBA, BIP. So really check into each one of those different approaches to see if you can grab the fidelity measure from folks that have done extensive work in that area. We got a great question asking about disproportionality being addressed. And again, if you wrote goals around disproportionality into your grant proposal, you want to be able to assess disproportionality. So taking the general evaluation framework and applying it to those questions, as well as the other questions that you have, is the real purpose of this webinar versus drilling down into each one of those. So if moving forward you have questions about the best way to do that, please contact your evaluation coordinator, or reach out again to the Technical Assistance Center, and we can help direct some of those questions. We do have.
If I can add to that,
yes,
one, for grantees that are focused on disproportionality, I would strongly encourage looking at the pbis.org website under the disproportionality tab. And if you enter that, there's information there both about intervention strategies and about data sources. So those would be some resources that would be directly applicable. In part, there are not interventions that have been empirically demonstrated on a broad scale with randomized control trials around the topic, but there are certainly some excellent promising practices.
Great. Thank you. Okay. Oh, this was a great question. Can we address the possible problems caused by relying only on self-reports from schools concerning fidelity? And my feedback on that question, I thought it was a great question, so thank you for posting that, is that we really want our coaches at the school and district level to hold our teams accountable for having documentation that things are in place and really pushing the team to do an accurate self-assessment. That's our first line there. In fact, we have evidence about with a tiered fidelity inventory that completing the TFI with the coach present results in more accurate results. We have the impact there. So we want to address that in that way. Rob, do you have anything else to add to that?
Yes. I think it's a really insightful question because there's a long history of showing that self-report oftentimes has lower levels of accuracy. So first off, what Jessica indicated is the really important message. The TFI and most of the tiered inventory measures of fidelity always rely on a team, not an individual, and they always rely on the team working with a trained coach when they deliver the information. Those two strategies have been very helpful for us. The other is, if you look at the McIntosh et al. Technical adequacy paper, one of the neat things is that the TFI data that were collected covaried well, like over 0.83, with the external evaluations that we have been doing with the SET and others. So we're reasonably confident that these are fidelity measures that are usable. We're really more excited about the idea of doing fidelity measures that are very efficient, and we use 15 minutes as a metric of efficiency, and lead to action plans. So I think we're looking for things that are accurate, that are efficient, and that actually lead to next steps in implementation.
Thank you, Rob. We have questions about reformatting some reports. So having users reformat reports. And Steve, I'm going to ask you to put a little bit more information in the questions box for us there so I can get a better idea of what you're talking about. Is there a specific requirement for training for evaluators that will use the TFI? Sherry, there's not a requirement for the training. I would strongly recommend viewing the webinar that's posted on PBIS applications looking at that PowerPoint very closely and asking questions if you have questions about the TFI. The TFI is a really slick assessment measure, assessment tool in my mind. It pulled from different fidelity measures that have been out there for some time on school-wide PBIS, a multi-tiered approach, and really pulled, I think, the best of those together, and has, as Rob had shared, has excellent psychometrics in alignment with other measures that are out there. So if folks have been using other measures, I think picking up the TFI will not be very difficult. And even if you haven't, the materials have been very thoughtfully put together to assist people to do that. So I believe that those will be excellent tools for your team. Okay, we have 2 more questions, and sorry I'm reading these because they just came in here. One suggestion, Rob, it might be helpful to provide a technical assistance webinar in building multi-tiered approach to address attendance. That's
excellent
idea. Oh, okay, so this is a great question. What about trainings that are being provided part of school climate that are not intended to be practices, but more of an overview? So here's the example. The district's going to provide trauma-informed care, a 2-hour overview, but there's no expectations for implementation. They are just introducing this to the staff.
So the important thing is come back to the question that was asked by the state, which is to what extent are the training and technical assistance efforts related to improved knowledge and understanding? So if the training is going to focus on building an overview of what the issue is and what the challenges are, it should have some specific objectives related to people leaving with a better understanding of how they would identify young children who come from trauma-affected contexts, and they should have a better idea of what the critical features of a school would look like that would address and support those kids. So I think the short answer is the way that you would do the evaluation was assessing if the targeted knowledge had actually been developed and achieved. And your assumption is that will be followed up with additional information on specific things you could do that would be implementation targets.
Great. Thank you. We had some. So if we have some comments and questions. If you cannot find webinars or documents on the PBIS website, please feel free to email me directly, and I will help you track those down. I will put my email address back up here in the chat box. We want to make sure I've gotten all of these. Okay, what about...
Actually, Jessica, at this point, we have met our time period, okay. So I think we need to wrap things up.
Okay.
Can you do that?
Yes, I can. Well, thanks to all of you for attending and being on the webinar for us today. For some of these outstanding questions, I will confer with Rob, and we will make sure we get you, there are not too many of them, we will get you some responses. Please stay in contact with the Technical Assistance Center as well as your grant managers for questions and concerns, and we are looking forward to seeing you all on the next webinar, so thank you very much.